Good evening or good afternoon or good morning to everyone, depending where you are in the world. Welcome to this CTO Craft Bytes. I'm joined today by Suzan Bond. I will introduce her in just a minute. Firstly, just a little bit about CTO Craft, if you're not already aware or perhaps not even a member of the community. It's a community of now over 7,000 CTOs and leaders of technology functions. We offer CTO mentoring, there's a coaching community, coaching circles for people all over the world, and also a Slack channel where you can communicate and share your own kind of successes, discuss your problems, and create solutions. So if you're not already a member, I really recommend you go to ctocraft.com and sign up. Special thanks to our headline partner, AWS, for making these Bytes possible, Bytes events possible. Anyway, my name's Dan Smith. If you've not seen me before in the CTO Craft community, I'm one of the CTO Craft coaches. I run some mentoring circles and host some events like this and some discussion groups as well. So hope to see you again at a future event. And today, as I mentioned, I'm joined by Suzan Bond. Suzan is a former COO. She's over 20 years experience and now an executive coach. So I'll let Suzan introduce herself.
I was like, what do I say about myself? Like those interview questions, tell me about yourself. So, as Dan said, I'm a former COO. I worked for a scaling startup in the developer tools space, and I've worked in technology for a couple of decades now. So I love technology. I work with a lot of engineering folks. I mean, I have clients who are CEO, COO. I've worked all across the board and lead our like chief architects, mostly in engineering. So I'm a trained coach and a leadership consultant. And gosh, I don't know what else to say. I mean, other than like leadership was an amazing and like one of the most challenging experiences of my entire life. So I think that's one thing that really informs my work and the way I think about the world and what I want to do, is because I thought it was like, I saw it one way, and then when I got into it, it was totally different than what I expected. So I love helping people to sort of help make that transition too.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Suzan. So today the topic is helping new leaders succeed. So just before we kick off, for the audience, there's an ask a question button. I see it at the bottom, or a kind of button. I think you see the same as me. Please click on it and start entering your questions, because we'd love to make this as relevant to you as possible and really talk about the issues that you're facing, or maybe successes you'd like to share. So please do start entering your questions. So helping new leaders succeed, I guess, Suzan, what do we mean by new leader?
Right. It's such a good question, a complex one, I think. In some ways, I think we use the word leader a lot, and I think there's some confusion between manager and leader. I mean? I know we say, we know the difference, but then do we? And what do we mean by that? When I say leader, what I mean, I don't think all leaders manage. Some do, some don't. And I think that's okay. I don't think people have to. I have a belief that we should not have to manage people in order to become a leader or to lead or to, have influence in the organization. It's something that I've a maxim I've held most of my life, because I'll tell a quick story. My dad was a design engineer at GM. He's still alive. He's just retired. But he was a design engineer at General Motors building prototypes. He built the Electrovare 2, the first electric car unveiled to the world. And other sorts of things. He was working on cars that would get, 80 miles to the gallon. And what happened with my dad is he didn't want to manage people. He just wanted to tinker and play with technology and explore what was possible in the realm of that world. And he was really stymied in his career because he didn't want to manage. And they put him $1 below the bonus pool and the leadership pool. Of course, it was very hierarchical back then. So I think that's where it comes from for me. Just as a little backstory, my love of engineers is a long history. So when I think about leaders, and I think about what it means to lead, I think that there are leaders who manage and there are leaders who not. I think we mostly know the leaders who manage. The leaders who don't manage, I think I look at people who are like staff engineers, distinguished engineers, chief architects, principal, all those titles sort of float around a little bit in terms of where they are at different organizations. And I see them as leaders because for me, a distinguishing factor with a leader is that they need to influence. They get a little bit further from the work. Even a principal engineer and a chief architect gets a little further away from the work, not completely. They're still going to be much more maybe hands-on code, or on those decisions, architectural decisions. But I think the other thing is that it's what I call horizontal leadership. We need to work across the organization. We need to work with our peers. So it requires different skill sets from us, right? Not just technical skills, but how do we collaborate and work with people who are different from us? How do we influence people who we don't manage, right? So that's how I think about leaders.
So quite a few interesting points there. So I guess one I picked up was maybe the one about your father. Sounds like he was more of a kind of leader in a kind of specialism rather than a leader of people. So that's an interesting distinction. And then this idea of managing versus leading. So I guess one of the things I've heard about leaders is you can't be a leader if people don't follow you, because then by definition you're not leading. And there probably is a need for managing, which is more about sort of perhaps dealing with the more day-to-day things, and then leadership, which is more about maybe slightly more aspirational. What about so, I mean, we're looking particularly at new leaders. Where might a new leader start? It might seem kind of overwhelming. What would you say are the first things that someone coming into leadership should consider?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first thing, it's going to sound really maybe different than what we expect, but for me, I think about marking it as a transition. Because a lot of times we push people along and we go like, oh, we think we're going to get promoted to the next thing, and then we go forward. And I think what we forget is that they are very different. Even IC leaders, it is not the same as what's gone before. Even manager to leader, it's very different. And I say this because this is, I think, where lots of people trip up, is recognizing that it's a transition and recognizing that we have to be different. And because, let's say, even IC leaders, and I say this because I think there's some stereotypes we have about leadership that I'm trying to dispel. We have more power as a leader with a title, or, even if you are at the forefront, even without the title, if you are seen as a leader, you have more power. So you have to recognize how you perception, the amount of control you might have, or perceived control. So for me, it always starts with making sure that you're marking the transition and you're noting that it is not like what happened before, and sort of taking inventory of, well, what got me successful then? And what's the role about now? What are the expectations now? Setting that with the people that we work with, our boss. Everybody has a boss, even CEOs. And, just sort of thinking through what's different and who do I need to be in this role? Because if we don't recognize the change, then how can we adjust? We act unconsciously, right? We all have it. We go back, and especially under stress, we go back to old ways, of doing things. And for most of us, that's digging down and getting the work done, being overly directive, right? Going, do this because I'm your boss, or I'll do this because you're my boss, which, okay, it can work, but that's not the best way to really, if you want people to follow you, it's not really the most effective. So that is my maybe counterintuitive thing, is like to mark the transition and emotionally what that is. And I think from there, the next thought is, get support. And yes, a coach, of course. Hello, you and I are both coaches. Everyone knows we're going to say that. But it's not because I'm a coach that I say that. It's because what happens when you get into leadership, and the further you go into leadership, for me, the less peers you have and the more lonely you get, and the more confidential information you hold and can't share with other people, and the more perspective you need. Because even if you tell people, tell me the truth, I want feedback. Are they? You know what I mean? Do they feel safe and comfortable, and are people really telling you the truth? So I think for me, those are the two things that are like the beginning points, so that you stay grounded mentally and emotionally. You know what I mean? Otherwise, again, we go back to stress and we go back to old ways. I'm sorry, I'm like an excited little puppy dog. I'll try not to talk fast, and I will try to stop at points.
No problem. So, I mean, yes, it's interesting that you say about marking the transition, and certainly what I see a lot in people that have just become a leader or a team manager, maybe looking to lead or manage, and maybe not even sure, but a position of responsibility. Often there's two things that are common. One is that they're just given the promotion or the title and maybe no kind of direction or support. So that's a real kind of issue, because it's like anything you're doing new for the first time, there's lots of unknowns. So having someone to ask questions or some guidance or whatever is really important. And then the second thing, which I don't know if it's particularly common in technology, but very often you're a peer in the team and then suddenly you're the manager or leader. And going from a peer to a leader might not necessarily be that simple, because you've gone from being sort of one of the people that you can kind of joke with, and then there's all sorts of questions about, what can I do? What's different? So I think that it can be quite a difficult area for people. Is that something you've come across?
Yeah, sorry. I love what you're saying. There's two things about that. It was so great. You're so right about the first thing. Usually it's like, and then a leadership team meeting appeared on my calendar and I did the listening tour and I was like, and now you're a leader. And it's like, welcome to the deep end, the cold deep end of the pool, right? It's really hard. Leaders are humans, right? Those are hard. I think the other thing that brought up too is what we mean by new leader, because I think there are different challenges. The challenge you mentioned is so great, which is you're a peer, you were a peer, and now you're the head, the leader, in charge, even perception-wise, right? I'm not saying necessarily leaders sometimes don't even see themselves as powerful or as in charge. People believe that. I'm like, the leaders I talk to don't say that. But I think it's also the different challenge too is what happens if you come in as a new leader to an organization that you have never been at before. So there you have a different challenge, right? Which is I have to build a trust bank. I have to figure out how to get people who don't know me, who don't have trust in me, to get on board with me. Right? So I think they're slightly different challenges. Can I just say something? I love this because you're spurring conversation. I think one of the things that I see a lot of, and I think we've all seen leaders do this, and I think it's mostly a mistake. I'm just going to be honest about it. Leaders come in and they're like, I need to have an impact. I have this big role, there's pressure, and I need to make sure I do a good job and people are depending on me. And by the way, I've seen chief architects do this too. Principal engineers, all sorts of leaders. And so what do? They make a lot of changes, right? Oh, let's reorg. We need to reorg everything. We're going to change all of these systems and we're going to start using new technology because I like this one better. And I think it's easy to see it as like a measure of control and maybe, wanting to make a stamp on it. And I can see why it might feel negative, but I think it's also comes from great pressure and not understanding how can I have an impact? How can I make sure? And I think a lot of them have imposter syndrome. Like me, a leader, do I deserve the role? There's a lot going on inside leaders' head when they start. So I think that's one thing that I really caution people, which is those first 90 days, be careful. And I know leaders, I've heard about them all the time. I know a leader who came in the middle of the busiest season of the year, started reorging the entire organization, pulled the engineering team off into hours-long meetings where they were talking for 55 minutes and the team got 5 minutes for questions for the whole team. Would suddenly like call, can we get on the phone in 5 minutes? They did not make day 100.
So there's definitely something there about trying too hard, right? So maybe even trying to be someone you're not. And I think leadership's all about being authentic. If you're trying to be someone you're not, then people are going to spot that, and they're not likely to see you as a real leader. And I think that's really exemplified by what you said earlier, that people don't have to have a title to lead, right? A team of peers, people kind of tend to naturally lead in certain ways. So there's always a risk of destroying the kind of natural leadership by trying too hard.
Yeah, and can I say one more quick thing? Because I love what you just said there too. I think it's also, we have to seek to understand and then to be understood. To go back to that, like that being a leader and followers, I think we go in thinking we know the answer and that we're supposed to know the answer as a leader. I'm supposed to know the answer. We put this heavy, the leaders I work with, heavy weight of the world. Maybe you too. Like it feels like they carry the weight of the world on them, which can make them, do things like having answers rather than saying, wait, let me get context. Even the people who move in from inside the organization. So sorry, I just wanted to sort of mention that you're making me excited, the things you're saying.
And that's, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of it. I don't know about the audience, but the concept of servant leadership, where you're really there in a sense to do the kind of more menial tasks, to get those out of the way so people can get on and create the real value. So maybe you're not in the limelight as the leader. Actually, you're leading because you're letting everyone else have the kind of environment when they can really thrive and create their best work. So yeah, it's not about leadership's not about you having your name up in lights. So it doesn't have to be for a lot of people. So there may be that kind of pressure people feel, as you were saying, that leader that had to go in and make a change. And of course, there are times when changes are needed quickly if there's a real burning platform, but very often it's more about listening, learning, and then building on what's there. So.
I love that. Yes, that's a great way to put it.
So we had a question come in from, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce, Mathieu. What is your idea to get honest feedback from people you lead about your performance as a leader? So that's a really interesting question, right? Because you want to know the real truth so that you can adapt. But there's always the risk that people will not necessarily tell you the truth because they're worried about how it will be received. Or I guess one thing that comes up is, and for me, I'll start off maybe, is anonymity. So can you make it anonymous? And also, I guess behind that is giving people the understanding of why you're asking for the feedback. So if there's the culture of the organization is really important there, isn't it? If it's an open organization where there is a culture of feedback, then asking is likely to get more honest answers. Whereas if you're in a kind of a team or a department where it's maybe a bit obscure how this is normally done, then that's certainly much harder to get honest feedback. Any thoughts from you on how to do that?
I love that. I love your answer, and I love two things. One, the way you blended like culture and feedback, right? Because the culture that surrounds depends on how, like, is feedback welcomed and all those things. Not only the culture, let's say in engineering, but also the company culture. So I love that you brought that up because I do think that those two influence each other. They're so intertwined. It's hard to to pull that out totally. I also love what you said about anonymity. One of the things that I've had a lot of the companies I've worked with do like employee engagement surveys from the anonymity perspective, right? That can really help to provide broad feedback. In fact, I just debriefed a leader on feedback from theirs, and it was really helpful. Some things they were like, I knew that, but a couple things surprised them. And it was wonderful that they had that information in order to think like globally, what's the feedback? What's the team feeling as well? And a way that people didn't have to say the hard truths to them. They could just see it on like, ooh, that's not a great score. And also we're below the mean in the company. Okay, that really tells me this is not just the culture. This is me. I need to look at this specifically. So I love what you said about anonymity and employee engagement surveys. I mean, they can be tough because you also have to make sure you follow up on them, right? You know what I mean? Like honest feedback. Well, are you following up on it? Because great, you gave us some, but did you do anything with it? And if you don't, well then why should I give you feedback if you're not going to do anything with it, right? So that's one thing. And I think, so, and then the thing that's sort of, I just piggybacked on you a lot there. But another thing I might add is, it's kind of related to what I just said, but is really listening, and the way that you, when someone gives you feedback, and we all felt it like the gut punch of like, ooh, that one hurts. but it's how we listen and how we respond when people give feedback. Not just do we do something about it, but are we able to do, like, manage our own emotions, right? Do what I call emotion management in that moment and say, even, especially if the feedback does not come out beautifully worded and there's an edge to it, and an accusations, which happens. People are people. They get their emotions hijacked, but it's where I think the role of, like, emotion management can really help, so that we are really, people will learn. We teach them, okay, you can say hard truths for me. You can say honest feedback from me. And even if I don't like it, I'm going to consider what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of, if you watch films or maybe even books or anecdotal evidence, a lot of leaders are sort of seen as this kind of very strong, independent person that knows everything. And my experience is that actually the people I most admire as leaders aren't like that. They're willing to ask for advice, show a little bit of vulnerability, and say, I'm not sure I'm doing this well, or how can I help you better as a leader? These kind of questions where it's not like saying, I haven't got a clue. I mean, sometimes that might be the case. It's probably best not to show it, but it's about showing that you feel that there's a gap that can be improved, and offering this kind of vulnerability, because people kind of, the emotional attachment we have to people that are a little bit vulnerable or showing that they're open to some kind of change is very different in quality than someone who appears like a billiard ball that knows everything, right? So I think that's a way to and then that's perhaps easier in a one-to-one kind of conversation to get some feedback about people, especially if I'm not sure where this question came from, but it's if there's a kind of particular area that you feel like you're not doing well as a leadership, then offering, well, I'm not sure that I'm leading in the best way for the team in this. Do you know any other ways that I could do it, or what would be more useful for the team? Can really open up that kind of conversation.
I love that. Vulnerability is really important. I mean, there is a line, and I do think leaders feel so much pressure to be right, to be strong, to be tough, to feel like they deserve the position, honestly, that they forget the vulnerability, and the vulnerability sort of goes out the window, which then makes it harder. They want the feedback, but then they're like, so the vulnerability is good. It's a tough one, but it's a really important one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, you're absolutely right as well. That you have to be prepared to follow through, right? If you're going to get people to speak honestly, then you've got to kind of do something about it. Otherwise, you lose any kind of respect that they're going to have for you, quite rightly.
Why do I tell you? And if you're not going to, and if you can't do something, explaining, hey, listen, I heard your feedback. I can't do it. Explain why you can't do it if you can. Sometimes we just have to say, I can't tell you why. That's the truth. Sometimes we have confidential information. But it's like follow up on it. It's really interesting. A leader I work with is really great about, about feedback. They're really clear about, when am I going to take your feedback and when am I not? And they said, oh, you don't want my feedback? And he said, well, no, listen, I don't want to give you the illusion that I'm going to do something. The decision's already been made. So, and it's out of my control. So I don't want to give you the illusion that you have a choice, or that I can hear your feedback, but it won't change it. And I really love that they're just open. Like, do you want me to give you the illusion of choice? And the person went, no. And they were surprised, right? So I think it's also really being clear about, here's a place where I can accept feedback or I won't. We can't accept it because whatever. The decision's been made. It's a group decision. There's legal reasons, whatever. But I love that this leader does that really masterfully. And I love that about them.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Yeah. It's a bit surprising, but I mean, it's authentic. So.
They don't do it all the time, by the way. There's someone who loves the team and is really is very open to feedback, beloved. I mean, their people follow them place after place, but it's in the rare situation when the decision's made and your feedback isn't going to change it. They're just open about it. Doesn't happen often, but I love that when it does, you're just open rather than pretend, because it goes back to, well, you're not going to follow up on it. So why did I tell you? Why was I vulnerable? Why did I stick my neck out and tell you something?
Absolutely.
That you're not going to change anything on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if we go back to new leaders, And keep the questions coming, by the way.
Yes,
Only
please.
one.
That was a
There
great.
must be plenty more out there, so don't.
Yeah, that
be
was
shy.
a great question. I love that.
Yeah. And in terms of new leaders, then, what are the typical reasons that you see that new leaders fail? Is it that they're just not good enough? They're bad choices for leadership. They don't get enough support. Any other? What is most common?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that when a leader is failing, or flailing, flailing before they fail, I think it's common for us to say they're just not competent. And I think sometimes that is true. I do think that happens. I do think that sometimes people get promoted or pushed into leadership who are truly not ready. And I actually see a lot of that even at the director and VP level, where someone's like, well, they need a promotion so they don't leave, but they're not ready. Okay, well, that's not really setting them up for success. You need to have a harder conversation about why they're not ready and help them understand what they need to do to be ready. And most of the time it's like it's the gooey bits, the people navigating organizational friction bits. It's not that you're not technical enough. And by the way, this applies for senior IC leaders too, in my experience. So I do think that happens personally. And I'm curious what you see too. I think more often is there's a lack of understanding. We make assumptions about what the role is and we don't have expectations set. Do we agree on what this role really is and what the priorities are and who I'm expected to be? So I think those conversations get skipped over a lot. I think the second reason is they don't get enough support. And listen, especially if you're reporting to a CEO, as you get further along in your career, you're going to get less support. We all know this, right? Like career ladders, they just start to fall away. You get the higher levels, there's not a lot there. You have to take on more of it and you have to get support. So if you're expecting, especially a CEO, but even a CTO to give you a ton of career development, that doesn't happen all that often. And I think that's part of that, like, we have to make the transition, like, oh, I'm in charge now. I have to take control of my career and I have to make sure that I have support. And I think the third thing is kind of what we talked about, or I don't know what number I'm at, but another thing is, I get too excited. Another thing is that I think folks feel like they have to adopt a style. We have this idea of like we said, strong leader, what a leader looks like. And we're strong and we're stoic and we're tough and we're directive and we make decisions, charge. But the truth is that there are lots of different leadership styles. And so it's about trying to find our own leadership style rather than adopting some, persona that we think we're supposed to do. So I don't know, do you have other, thoughts on why you see them fail?
Well, certainly seen ones like that. I mean, I guess quite a common one is someone didn't actually even want to be a leader, and they're kind of forced or coerced or told. Don't want to say no, but then aren't really bought into the idea. That I certainly see that one.
It's a good one.
Certainly not having the support is also common. And another one I see a lot is, you're going to lead, but you've also got to do all the work you did before. Well, like...
They have like a dual role, right? It's like, okay, I have my head in the sand, but then you want me to pick it up, but wait, what? Yep. That's a great one, actually. I think that both of those are really hidden ones. And sometimes I think the first one too, people feel like that's the way to succeed. They don't really want to do it, but they feel like they're supposed to. And so they are kind of pushed into it by cultural expectations of what it means to be successful in our career. But I think you're right too on that. On the second one, I think those are really good points. Like, do we really set them up for success by giving away part of that work? I think tech leads struggle with this, right? And Pat Qua has a really great book on this and talks about, that balance between doing the work and leadership, and how do you balance that, and is that balance correct?
Yeah. But I mean, it's certainly unrealistic expectations. But on the other hand, I mean, when are people ready to become a CTO, right? It's like a bit like becoming a parent. Are you ever ready to become a parent? It's always a bit of a leap of faith in these things. So I guess it's closing the gap that you're going to feel fairly confident you're going to be able to get to the other side, at least cling on to the edge and pull yourself up rather than fall into the chasm.
I love that, right?
And that's where the support comes, right? If you've got someone there to push you up or pull you up, then that can make all the difference.
Yeah.
All right. So no more questions coming. So I don't know. I guess everyone knows everything. So maybe they can, instead of giving us some questions, give us some answers, and we'll make up the questions. But I do keep the questions coming.
Yeah, and I even love sometimes like people's observations. It's always interesting,
exactly.
like people's observations about leadership and what they see from their lens.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love more questions.
how, from your experience as a COO, and you were identifying people that could be leaders, how do you kind of identify someone as someone you think would be a good leader?
That's a good question. Before I go to that, what you reminded me was, I want to go back a little bit to why they fail, and it is a little bit of new leader quality, but like you made me think about, I think another reason why new leaders fail is an organizational reason. So because when I was a COO, I saw people brought into for example, let's say we bring somebody into a new function we've never had before, and we don't really what do we do around change management? How are we, making sure that they're being brought into the leadership team and that we're seeing it as a team? And I think sometimes they fail because there's jockeying between different heads of areas, and we aren't really saying, okay, we're a team, we're a group. And so someone can fail out because unfortunately they were sort of pushed out, or they were not really accepted because change management hadn't been done at an organizational level. I just wanted to sort of say that because I do think there's multiple reasons for failure. I've seen that as a COO. We sort of had some challenges bringing in new functions, and then we had to sort of say, okay, hang on a minute. It happened before I was there. Okay, so let's go back and let's define the roles, let's define expectations, and all of that. So I think I just wanted to mention that when you said that. I think the one thing, I love that there's questions coming in. I'll just say one thing on the new leader quality. I don't really have a laundry list, I think I see it as one thing that I really, if it's one or two, I don't know, I'm bad at counting. But one thing is that they take initiative. They're willing to step up, take responsibility, and take initiative. That's how I became a leader. I just started stepping up and started doing things. And then I got promoted, and then I was the head of the department, and I was like, oh, okay. This was before I became a COO, much earlier in my career. So I think that's one thing. And I think the second thing for me, I look for a willingness to grow, to be open to, and to grow, because for me, leadership is not about, I'm tough, I'm strong, I give the direction. For me, it's about, am I willing to grow and learn? Because otherwise it's going to be painful. The people who work with me, for me, around me are not going to have a great time. So those are just a couple things I look for in people, as are they willing to take initiative rather than being told? Because as you know, you get further up, you are not told. You have to be the one who's making things up. And two, are you willing to grow and be introspective? And if you're not introspective, are you willing to learn?
Yep, great points. So Ken's raised an interesting question there. So any recommended training to take tech leads into head of roles? So there's behind that's the kind of question: are you born to lead, or can you be trained to lead?
I actually would love to hear your perspective on this, because you've been a CTO before, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I would love to hear what your answer is, if you don't mind answering first, because I think your perspective would be different than mine.
Mm-hmm. I certainly don't believe that only people that are born to lead can lead. I think certainly there's a lot that can be learned. As you said just now, learning is important. I don't think I was a particularly good leader as a CTO. I kind of manage, but I recognize there's lots of people that are better than me, which is probably now why I'm a coach and an independent consultant. But there's certainly some, I think, key kind of skills that aren't necessarily easy to pick up. And I'm thinking of things like listening, ways of communicating with different people. So everyone have different kind of styles to communicate. And people can take in information much easier if it's closer to their kind of natural level. So some people like more emotional, some people might love more factual, some people like bigger picture, some people like details. So there's lots of different kind of scales that you can use, but trying to match people with what they can most easily take in. So these kind of skills are useful, I mean, anywhere really in life, but particularly as you get to being leaders of more people, because you're trying to manage your message and create a kind of working environment that's successful for more people. So there's more kind of variation. So I think those kind of, and I mean, that's kind of training in a sense. You can go on courses to do that. As far as training, well, running some of the kind of common processes like one-to-ones are very important. Certainly there's courses, or I mean, there's a CTO Craft workshop that I ran on one-to-ones, which is about kind of what principles are relevant. And then there's also obviously a kind of customization for individual people. But I think there certainly can be things that can be usefully learned from training, but there's also got to be something coming from inside about you caring about the mission of the organization and caring about people and generally wanting to make it a success.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think I agree with you. There's no like seed for leadership. I've written about this, not extensively, but quite a bit around like the idea of like great man theory, which, you know, like these leaders are born, which is really interesting, right? Because it goes back to these like white aristocratic men. I'm like, wow, that leaves out a lot of people. And it's just not true. There is no seed for leadership. I think I would totally agree in terms of like, what kind of training? It's all on the people and organizational bits. That's where I think I see most people struggle. Yes, folks in the engineering side of the house, but actually all over. I've got some marketing people who are also struggling with the people and organizational bits. And what I mean by like, how do we navigate organizational friction? How do I navigate like shared land that's in dispute, land where there's no owner, right? That's the organizational friction that as you go into a head of role, you are going to be increasingly in that land. And that requires much more of like the people bits and understanding that. So anything that I call it the people bits rather than soft skills, because I think the soft skills are the hardest skills. Not biased at all, but I think like the people bits is where I would really look to. And I think you gave some great examples. And I honestly believe coaching is a really great place, like getting some coaching even before, as you're stepping into it and moving into it, to help you prepare and to reflect on where are my growth edges? Where do I have a hard time, and where am I going to need to really step up there?
And I think technology leaders and people that have started off in technology have quite often, and it's a bit of a stereotype, right? Well, I went into technology because I don't like people. But I think there is something about, I mean, if you think about the time that someone who's writing software code, then they're probably spending 80% of their time probably with their headphones on a complicated problem, which is kind of very much internal. And so going to a kind of leadership of the function role, where actually you're probably spending most of your time, probably almost all of it, dealing with kind of people and interrelationships between people, is a huge change. So, I mean, it's not surprising that technology leaders find that difficult. I mean, it's difficult for anyone, but I think it can be a particular challenge, and it's not for everyone, right? Some people just want to stay being coders or architects and dealing with technical things, which is, well, at least should be absolutely fine, but it's not always fine in an organization, right, as we discussed earlier. Steve's asked, any thoughts on different challenges in going from being a team lead to a head of department role? So they're taking the kind of next step up. So you've got some leadership experience under your belt, but now going up to the next level. What kind of thoughts on that, Suzan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sort of depends. I mean, you said team lead. I think of like tech lead to head is like the challenge there is getting out of the code, right? Getting your head out of the details. And I do think that that's part of it. I think actually for both, a lot of it is getting your head out of the details, which, by the way, Ken, I just saw Ken's comment below, right? The biggest challenge is they're struggling to get out of the detail and think more about strategy, big business objectives, compromise. I'm sorry, my inner Cocker Spaniel is so excited with you, talking with you all about this. But I think Ken's point is actually really true. I think that's actually a huge challenge for people, right? Is that because they feel responsible for it, which is good. We want them to feel responsible, that when they get stuck or the deadlines get close and they get under stress, they go downward instead of outward, right? Instead of thinking about the bigger picture and how do I need to guide and what are the levers I need to pull and how do I build capacity in the team rather than relying only on me or even a few set of people. And I think that is a change because people who go from a team lead, let's say management, again, they're more in the details. And when you go into a head of department role, you should not really be in the details, in my opinion. I mean, depending. If it's teeny tiny, sure. But when I see leaders down in the details, I'm always like, ooh, lift the head. That's just, I think that for me is one of the challenges. Ken's point is like directly on point for what I was thinking about.
Yeah. And I think as the higher you go and the bigger the organization gets, then you have to have trust in the people at these lower levels that they're doing the detail, right? So if you become a head, you've got to make sure that there's someone there managing the team to manage the detail, and your role becomes more like a conductor of the orchestra, right? Making sure everyone works together. And yeah, of course, if the first violin comes along and says, hey, we got some trouble in the first violins, you might go over and talk to them or help them out or provide some support, whatever it might be. But otherwise, you need to kind of stay at the higher level. I definitely agree with you.
Can I say one thing about that? When you said that, what it made me think of too is I think that one of the harder pieces of moving into those roles is letting go of control. You have responsibility, but the more you try to control things, dig in the weeds, be directive, tell people, the worst time almost everybody has. Yeah. So I think there's a lot about how do I let go of control and yet be responsible at the same time. I think it's a tricky place for a lot of us to grapple with. And I think that, so it's like, again, letting go of control too, because I think that's where leaders can, struggle. Because I think as a team lead, in some ways you have more control. You have a little bit more control. In some ways, of course not. There's plenty of decisions that go beyond, managers and team leads. But I would say letting go of control is a big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, of course, if you're a head of department, you're trying to control everything, then that's probably going to take all your time. So how would you do the other things like, I don't know, go to board meetings or be more strategic, create the strategy or so on? And that's where people fail at that because they don't realize that they're fundamentally different kind of roles. So hopefully, Steve, we answered that question. It'd be good to hear your thoughts.
Can I just say too, like I had a leader, when leaders have too many, when I'm like, they're so busy and they have so many meetings, I'm always thinking, do you need to let go or step out? Like, where are you stepping in and stepping over your people? And I had one leader who literally had 50 hours of meeting a week. And I'm not actually exaggerating. We got it down to 25 fairly quickly. And I still was like, that's too much. Yeah. And they were the team was under-resourced. I mean, that was part of the problem. But 50 hours a week, you're way too in the weeds.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have another question here from Matt again, whose name I'm probably still getting wrong, but I don't know if he can give me a phonetic pronunciation of it. So he's saying I think I'm definitely going to ask you this one, Suzan. What were your first 3 major steps when putting a new person into a leadership position?
That's a great question. I love that. I feel like we don't think about it enough. We're like, there's the leader, and plop them in. So I think it actually starts, it starts with the hiring process. And I mean hiring internal or external, because even when someone's promoted, it is a hiring process to me, whether it's formal or not. Some companies are very formal and they have to apply, external applications and internal applications. Others, it's less informal. But for one, it's like how we start the process, who's involved, how do we socialize what's happening, how do we basically prepare people for what's happening. So magic. Oh, magic. Ooh, I like that. I just was looking at how Magic says their name. I like Magic. It's pretty cool. I'd like to be Magic. They're called Magic. So again, it goes back to who are we involving in the hiring process before we get there? So like when I became a COO, I had worked with the company on a project. I had been coaching the CEO and was asked to come in. And then I interviewed with 14 people. They let anybody in the company interview with me. I had like a panel of like 8 people and me. Great. By the time I came into the company, I had interviewed or worked with half of the company. And I think there's something that was really like made that process much more, for me getting into the company a lot easier. So I think it starts with the hiring and who do we involve and how do we, and then how do we introduce that and how do we make sure to set expectations? How do we help them think through it? And if it's me, like when I've been a COO or a head of people or whatever, for me, I literally came in and interviewed everybody in the entire company. I spent time had a one-on-one with every single person. Now, as a COO, that's appropriate. Maybe it may or may not be, but just to really listen and to, again, part of what I'm doing is building trust, and I'm trying to understand the context and get the lay of the landscape. Even if I've been there before, I might not understand all of the details because new layers are revealed to us as we step into leadership, right? There's always layers in an organization. What we see is not what we see. So I think that's the second thing is like really, again, listening and all of that. And then I think the other thing that I would do is, let's say I'm in charge of bringing this person in. I'm a CTO, or I'm a CEO, or I'm a VP of engineering, or whatever. I mean, it could be any role. Is thinking about taking a step back, seeing it as a change and a transition, and seeing who's going to have the hardest time with this, who's going to benefit from this, who might this actually not be fantastic. We know those things happen. There's not like amazing decisions always. There's good, bad, and better sometimes. So I would step back and think about that and think about how am I addressing those audiences? How am I thinking through that once that decision's been made so that I can ease that process? So for example, let's say I'm bringing in a head of business development for the first time. I might need to have a talk with marketing and customer support who have inputs into that decision, or I'm bringing in somebody new in engineering, product might, those kinds of things. I think that was 3.
I think it's kind of slightly different take on your 3 points. I think first one would be to make sure that the kind of mandate for this person is clear, and I mean by that kind of telling everyone that, because there's nothing worse than going to someone in the company or other way around, someone coming to you, I'm leading X, Y, Z. So are you? I mean, it's got to be advertised, right? That internally, or this person's coming to do this, and make it clear what the role is or the purpose of it is. So I think that would be the first one. The second one, as this person's manager, would be to kind of clearly establish how we know how they're getting on, right? So, for example, by month 1, you'll have done this, by month 2, and by month 3. And I mean, that it's not like strict goals, but these are the kind of targets. And it would be, the third thing would be, we're working towards the targets, right? So I will support you to do this, but in return, you have to come to me with your challenges, problems, whatever. And it might not be that I'm doing all the support, but it might be, okay, well, you can talk to so-and-so, we'll find you a coach or whatever it might be. but be making the person aware that they've got the support. So those would be my 3, which I think pretty similar to yours, but
they add. Yeah, they add. I love that, because you talk about communication. Mine, I had communication in there, but like, do we have the mandate, making sure, and then also how are we measuring success? What does it look like? Because there's all different sorts of ways that flavors of CTOs, VPs of engineering, directors, all of that. There's all sorts of flavors of those things. So what is the mandate for this person, and what does success look for this person at this time, at this organization? I love your answer. I'm like, oh, I like that answer.
Yeah, no, I think if you don't make clear what's expected, even if it's at a high level, then how do people know if they're going right or not? I mean, any of these kind of roles, when you're new to them, there's so much new. At least knowing kind of the big kind of signposts that you've got to get to and go past is useful. And it's easy as well, isn't it? If you do that in a shorter time scale, right? Okay, well, I'm already heading off, and I don't think I'm going to get there after 2 weeks. It's much better than after 3 months. Like, oh well, didn't work out. So that's why I would do it. But I mean, it's also when I've been in roles like this, it's just like I've got absolutely no idea what I'm doing. So having someone to ask, or at least check with, is really important. And admitting also, you've got to be able to admit that actually, I don't know what I'm doing, help. But also got to help yourself to get that. Okay, well, I've tried this, but I still don't know what to do. Whereas if someone comes up to me and says, well, I don't know what to do, what have you tried? Oh, nothing. It's like, okay, well, at least go away and try something.
Well, and I love what you're reminding me too. I think that one of the things I think we miss when it comes to new leaders in general is that we're the interconnection. We're an interconnected web, and your success is my success. Your failure is, does not help all of us. And how much we're like, we have to think organizationally, and think about it as we're a team, and we're a whole team. And I think that's where I see most people, they put pressure on themselves, or they are isolated. Here you go, be successful, good luck, get some swimmies for the deep end of the pool, so I think it's like thinking organizationally, and that we're an interconnected web is one of the things I think where we really forget that about leadership, and that is primary for me. That is the place where we are most successful, when we remember that, and when we can function well at those levels with our peers and collaborate across.
Yep, definitely.
Not an island.
All right. Well, we're already at the end of time. Just have a quick look here to see Steve's response. So that something about accepting that all bases can't be covered as you get more responsibility, and it becomes about priorities. I mean, that's a great point, right? Yes. I mean, there's no way you can cover everything, but it's about working out where your time is best spent, and also kind of directing others, right? I mean, if you imagine that there's several fires burning at any one time, I mean, you've got to have other people deployed to look at some of them while you kind of manage the overall situation. So that's a great point. So thank you very much, Suzan. I'm going to pop your details and my details in the chat in case anyone wants to. Hopefully they'll come out, and they kind of come out, I think. And if anyone wants to connect and continue the conversation, thanks so much for your insights today and for joining us on this CTO Craft event. And thank you very much to the audience for coming along and bringing your questions. It's been really interesting, and hope to see you again at a future event, or in the community, or as Jersey said, at a workshop. So I'll find out about that, Jersey. But thanks very much. Thanks, Suzan.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Take care. Bye.